Hello and welcome to mini lecture 8. In this lecture we're going to consider services, service processes, co-production and essentially service systems, analysing service systems using a process chart. So what I'm going to do is talk us through the business models and business processes, a little bit of a recap on what we did earlier in the unit. We're going to consider what are services, take a specific look at self-service, and then remember what we talked about earlier in the unit on co-production. Then we're going to particularly look at service processes and mapping them and the different types of interactions that services use. And then we're going to analyze them, perhaps using PCN analysis and strategic positioning of digital services. So that's what we're going to go through today. A reminder on business models first. Remember, business models are a way to connect the market and technological change, often to make innovative business models. And there are different layers associated with business models. There's a strategic layer, there is a business model layer, which is the one we've considered mainly, and then there is a process layer. And so the business model, as we look at it, if we look at the layer around processes, that's about organization and workflow. So if you remember, we had an example of a business model. And all of these business models would have would effectively have a process. So there would be a process for managing channels. There would be a process for managing customer relationships. The value proposition would be a collection of processes. The activities of platform management or web development would have processes. So fundamentally, throughout the business model, you will find processes, different processes. The revenue stream, there would be an invoicing process. There may be a sales process. There may be a cost management process. So once you put a business model together, you effectively have got a lot of processes, and that's the process layer of the business model. What we've got here is a process hierarchy, and what I wanted to do was just to remind you that each service or market or product would have its own business model. So an organization, a very small organization, might have one business model, but if you take a large organization such as IBM, there will be multiple business models, multiple services, and so multiple processes. The key parts, though, of a business model is the business process, which is what I want to make clear in this section, the revenue model, which we've talked about, and the value proposition. So these three things are the key parts of the business model that we're very interested in as digital people, because that's where digital is largely applied, at the value proposition to generate revenue and to manage processes. And a process consists of a verb and a noun. You'll see that as we go through the lecture. So remember, a process is a verb and a noun, and you'll see that as we go through. So service processes, we talked about the United Services Theory, the Unified Services Theory, interaction, body and mind, information and possessions. We very early touched on this at the beginning of the unit. Delivering value potential and co-creating value, and providing revenue opportunities. So you've got this business model layer at an organizational level, at a sort of organizational strategic level, at a product level, and then business models would also operate at a service level, and typically they would have these components: revenue model, business processes, and value proposition, as well as the other components. but those are key ones we're interested in. And then there are service processes which manage interactions between entities or between customer and provider. And all processes have a verb and a noun. Here are some definitions for processes. A collection of activities that take one or more kinds of inputs and create outputs. Very similar to the model we saw for the sustainability model that we looked at last week. Dictionary, a series of continuous actions or operations. A set of logically related tasks performed to achieve a defined business outcome. So you can think of watching this and producing a mini lecture as a process. There is a series of activities I've gone through. I've created some slides. I'm talking to you now. I'm going to upload it. So there is a process, and that's essentially what we mean by process. So business processes are closely linked to information systems. They are a set of activities that generate results through workflows, material and resources, and they might be a functional area. They might be cross-functional, they might be go from sales to operations, they might be just specific to a particular area. And again, they will be described as a verb and a noun. And here's an example. Notice the verb order fulfillment. So there is order is the verb, it means doing something, and fulfillment is what we're going to do. We're going to fulfill something, and this is a very high level of sales. Generate order, submit order. Notice the verb and noun. Generate order, submit order, check credit, approve credit, generate invoice, assemble product, ship product. That's a very high level business process. And you could see that within the assemble product, there would be many sub-processes of buying materials and creating things and labor to actually manufacture things. And even the shipping ship product process will have a lot of activities and resources associated with it. There will be transport, there will be operations, there will be logistics, there will be travel, so lots of things there. So this is the effectively what's going on. This is a typical operational process where you have got materials, information, and customers. You've got input resources, and then you've got transforming resources. So you've got some resources that are going to be transformed, and note the customer is in there. And then you have got some resources that transform, and they go into this transformation process, and they create an output of products and services which will go to customers. And that's very much the traditional mechanism of describing a process. So if you wanted to go to the dentist, you bring your body there. The facilities and staff, the dentist and the dentist chair are all transforming resources. The process is you have something done to your teeth, and you go out with mended teeth. So you can see you've got this traditional view of processes like that. I've already done that slide, so we'll slip on to the service operations. And so this again is another view of the process that we've just looked at. This is a typical manufacturing process where you have suppliers and inputs, you have a provider, you have an output, and you have customers. However, from the unified services theory, services are production processes that act on or with customer resources. So what does that mean? Well, that means that as an input to the service provider and the transformation, there is an input of the customer. In the case of the teeth, the body is given to the service provider. The belongings, maybe something you own, would be pushed into the service provider as well. Maybe if you wanted your laptop repaired, or as is increasingly the case, that we've got information, and that information is in digital form. And this effectively is a service now, because we have got an interaction. We have got customers, resources, combining with the input resources of the service provider to create an output. So to be a service, we need customer providing resources and the service provider adding value. And here are some examples here. I'll flip through them quite quickly. And you can see that in each case, the customer has provided inputs to provide a service outcome. And you can see the verb noun configuration here: financial statements, transported passengers, repaired car, business solutions, mended teeth, legal remedies. So you've got these processes here. So that was service process. And what we now know is we talked about self-service at the very beginning of the unit. And self-service is critical because you use the customer's labor and the customer's resources as an organization to deliver the services for the customer. And some of the early ideas around this came from Piggly Wiggly in 1916, where they changed the shop from this arrangement to this sort of arrangement, where the customer picks up the goods and there is a checkout at this end. So self-service is fundamental to digital. And so now, when you hear digital, it really means self-service, because you require to have the customer resources available to actually deliver the service they require. So this is Amazon Shop, where the customer does all of the work and collecting, and there are no checkouts on that shop. Notice the just walk out. And this is IKEA, where the customer does all the assembly of the furniture. And of course, services are everywhere. So 70 to 80% of GDP is delivered by services. High ratio of employment, and consequently services are everywhere you look. And we talked earlier about servitization, and even products like aircraft engines becoming services. And quite interestingly, as we saw with the pandemic, all of the interactions, the interactions between customer and provider that were face to face, the service was changed, and some businesses were closed. So services are everywhere. So what are services? Services process customer resources. So services look after, they take the customer's self and effort and work. They take their belongings and their information. So when you go to an organization, you are providing resources to create a service, to co-create a service. So services, as defined by Sampson, are customer provider interactive processes. And we'll look more about those as we go through. So this is based on the unified services theory. And here you can see what we've just been talking about: the self, the customer's belongings, and the customer information, and that the service company is trying to add value to these inputs. And there are different types of input. Sometimes there is a lot of customer input, sometimes there is less, and there are different models associated with different types of service. But essentially, with services, the consumption, consumer demand and delivery, often occurs simultaneously, so making the exact time of production a critical issue. And what that means is when you go to the dentist, the service has to be created with you and the dentist together simultaneously, and therefore timing becomes a really important critical issue, and hence the appointment systems associated with those types of service to make sure the timing is right. Going back to very early on in the unit, we talked about co-production. We talked about the 10 fundamental principles of co-production, and we said value is always uniquely and phenomenologically determined by the beneficiary. The customer is always the co-creator of value. So this work on services and this work on co-production, you bring those together and you can see what is happening with a digital business. You're using customer resources, you're co-creating value, you're using particularly resources you're particularly using are the information from the customer's information, where they are, what they do, what they like, what they want to eat. So that customer information is now becoming more and more dominant with digital businesses. Now there are 3 types of interaction. There is something called direct interaction, which is a person acting in conjunction with another person. So this is my dentist example. This is a dentist mending a person's teeth, and people are interacting with people. That is direct interaction. Then there is a type of interaction which is surrogate interaction. This is where a person is acting with the resources of another entity, not with their body and their mind, but with their belongings and information. And you can see why this is quite critical. So the people have been removed from the interaction, one person has, and the other person is acting on the resources of another. So in this example, the customer is interacting with the resources of the bank to gain money. So this is surrogate interaction, and there is no bank teller, there is no cashier. So this is surrogate interaction. And then finally there is independent processing, which is when the entity is acting only with the entity's own resources. So here is an individual servicing or installing an ATM machine. The ATM machine is owned by the bank. That is completely independent. There is no customer interaction there. They're just using their own resources. And the example would be you using your laptop to access your resources, whatever they may be. So you can use the software on your laptop to independently process whatever you want. You can write a letter, and that's independent processing. So we can draw those zones. Here is the independent processing for the customer. Here is the independent processing for the provider. And these two zones are surrogate interaction for the provider. This is perhaps using the information from a customer about their account and working out things on their bank account for them. And this is the customer interacting with the machine to gain some money. So this is surrogate. And then this space is where there would be direct interaction, where you'd walk into a bank and interact with the bank teller to take out some cash or to make an application. So this would be direct interaction. The key thing about this is that these are interactive, these are co-productive actions. and this is service. So if you can imagine, these help to define, with using those definitions from Samson and from CoProduction, you start to define service as either direct interaction or surrogate interaction. And the independent processing may be manufacturing, independent processing for the customer, maybe writing a letter or doing something with your own resources. So we start to map a service on a PCN diagram. And again, you can see here that here's the same diagram, but you've got the customer domain here and you've got the provider domain here. And these are service process steps. So when we said what is a process, they occur across here. So there is either surrogate interaction in the process or direct interaction. And this space where the customer does surrogate interaction is self-service. And this is where this space is co-production, where the customer uses their own labor but actually does something with the supplier in an interactive way, a direct interactive way. This is do-it-yourself. This is service using belongings, and this is really manufacturing. And what's quite important to recognize here is this space is where customers are most intense, and when there is most intensity in the direct interaction and face-to-face. And all of these process steps are now more and more mediated by technology. So we have technology connecting provider and customer, and sometimes they will be connected in surrogate, and sometimes they will be connected in direct interaction. And you can still use technology for direct interaction. As you can see with our Collaborate lectures, which are here, they are actually direct interaction, particularly if you write in the chat or you use your microphone. They are definitely direct interaction. They are live, they are person to person. There is a mediating technology. And so why this is important? Because it can give us the strategic process that's critical, and it's a service design decision. So what I'd like to do is just to show you that, to analyze investment. So this is a process. Some of you are from finance and accounting. This is a process called analyze investment. So you want to put some money in the stock market. So what you've got, you could, as a provider, write a book on analyzing investments and how to do that. And you can produce that, print that, and that's quite an effective process, and it's completely independent processing. You could, of course, take information from a customer and analyze their portfolio. So you could say to the customer, send me your risk profile, send me how much you want to invest, tell me which companies you want me to invest in, and then I'll do it and send it back to you. So you could choose this method. You could, of course, choose this. You could directly interact. You could be a financial advisor. You could talk to a financial advisor. You can discuss their financial needs. You can help them analyze investments and suggest alternatives. And you could have an hour or 2 hour long meeting with them. So you could have direct interaction. Or you could do surrogate interaction. And some of you may have heard of robo-investors, and that's robotic investment on mobile apps, where effectively the provider over here has provided an app. You provide your resources, your phone, your information, and you input things and make movements of stock markets and investments and all of these things. And you can do all of that. Surrogate interaction on the app. And of course, that's what's going on everywhere. So many apps are now designed in this space where the customer does surrogate interaction using the resources of the provider. And of course, what happens is all the information about the customer goes over here. And so this is fundamentally what big data and the data economy and the big tech companies are doing. They are essentially collecting lots of data from lots of surrogate interactions by customers who have input this information, and then they're analyzing this. So it's in this case for investments, but of course if this was social media and you'd been posting on Instagram, they could very quickly independently process lots of photographs and material to analyze things very efficiently. And then finally, you could do everything on your own. You could build your own spreadsheet on your laptop. You could analyze investments, make your own decisions, send a check to the stockbroker, and do that. So you can see you have got a strategic decision to make about where to put your process. So when you're looking at your organizations, where have they put their strategic process? Is it here? Is it here? Is it there? Is it there? Or is it a combination of all of these? But which is the dominant one? The implications of this, and this is exactly the same diagram, is that as you move to independent processing, the customer gains more control. As you move to providers independent processing, the provider gains more control. So this is economies of scale are very high. So this is typical in manufacturing with high volume manufacturing, processing books, building cars, making sandwiches in a factory. As you move over here, the customer has maximum customization. So you can choose where you invest. You can choose what you eat in your sandwich. You can make it yourself. And these two positions are interestingly compromises between the economies of scale and customization. And then the direct interaction is the most inefficient for the provider. So the maximum amount of resources or inputs has to be made for the output. And consequently, most organizations will not like inefficiency, and consequently, that's why a lot of process positioning choice has moved to here or to here. So the direct interaction, and then some of you will probably prefer surrogate interaction. This extends to, do you want to talk to your parents directly, or would you rather message them using WhatsApp? It buys you a bit of control. It gives you some customization of when you respond. You get time to think about that. So what's happening is customers are gaining more control through digital businesses. They're gaining more customization. The businesses are reducing their inefficiencies, but there's no real economies of scale. So the technology, the economies of scale really comes from the collection of data. So the data they've collected from this space ends up here, and they've got economies of scale and masses of big data. So that's how PCN works. and we'll look at that in the tutorials. You'll have a go with that. So just to summarize this lecture, self-service is often the basis for digital process designs, more than often now. So without customers doing this work, using their mobile devices, it wouldn't work. So consequently, self-service is the basis for most digital process designs. Services are production processes that act on or with customer resources. So digital services processes require co-production. You've got to have the customer and provider together, and you also require interaction between these entities across the process. And they're not necessarily people, they could be machine to machine. And then PCN analysis is a way to design a strategic process and to think about the outcomes around efficiency, economies of scale, customization, and control. And so this is the strategic process choice that most digital businesses are taking. And as we saw, the vast amount of those are surrogate in the customer's domain. So thank you for listening to mini lecture 8. Hope all is well with you all. And as I say, we'll cover these in the tutorials.